Yes. Can you hear me well? Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation by the organizers. Yeah, as said already, I'm doing this presentation together with Nick, since we work together on this topic, and we will switch on the half, just so you don't wonder about it. Yes. As discussed in this panel already, on the example of record theory, the Frankfurt School dealt in different ways with the question of an adequate critique of capitalist society. Marcuse's understanding of adequate critique of capitalism also changed over time. As we will try to show today, however, it can be argued that the critique of labor was at the center of Marcuse's critique of capitalism. Overall, it is a recurring motive in critical theory even after the first generation. Someone who took up this, one might say, strand of critical theory was the Canadian historian and social philosopher Moïse Postone. In 1993, Postone published his major work, Time, Labor, and Social Domination, in which, by his own admission, he formulated a reinterpretation of Marx's critique of political economy. In the following, we want to show that Postone's critique follows Marcuse's work in essential parts, but goes beyond it in crucial points. Furthermore, we will argue that thinking Marcuse's and Postone's critique together accounts for a connection that has been underexposed until today, the critique of labor as a fundamental component of a critical theory of capitalist modernity. The literature on the connection between Marcuse and Postone is relatively scarce. Better known, however, are the pictures of Marcuse's death ceremony in Starnberg, at which Postone, among others, was present along with Jürgen Habermas or Rudi Dutschke. We heard a little bit about this already in the opening speech by Harold Marcuse. Yeah, so this is the picture, but a lot of people actually don't know that it is Postone in the middle of the right picture. A short time later, Postone, together with Barbara Brick, who is also pictured in the photos of Marcuse's death ceremony, they wrote an until now unpublished text in which they paid tribute to Marcuse's critique of capitalism. What we know is that the text was probably written in preparation for a conference planned by the Frankfurt publishing house Neue Kritik, translated New Critique, which, however, for various reasons, ultimately never took place. The text by Postone and Brick makes clear that there were not only some biographical but also a lot of theoretical overlaps between Postone and Marcuse. But of course, this is a retrospective interpretation by Postone, as Marcuse didn't get the chance to note Postone's work, as far as I know, because of their age gap, of course, as well. Postone's reference to Marcuse is also evident in some discussion transcripts from the 1970s. The protocols, some of which are in volume unpublished, published by Neue Kritik on Marcuse's text, The End of Utopia, which is this book. Now I lost my line. Here, document the theoretical discussions between left-wing students and Marcuse. Among these students was Postone, who came to Frankfurt in the 1970s because of his admiration of critical theory. And as he said later in an interview, I came to Frankfurt, not to Germany. The aforementioned text, as well as the discussion transcripts, show that Postone dealt intensively with Marcuse's work and referred to his work in many ways. In Postone's main work, Time, Labor, and Social Domination, however, Marcuse appears only in passing and in footnotes. Postone's full reference to Marcuse remains therefore implicit and thus appear more sparse than it may have been in reality. On the other hand, Postone devoted a detailed critique to other theorists of the Frankfurt School in Time, Labor, and Social Domination. In several chapters, there, he deals with the cause of the so-called pessimistic turn of the Frankfurt School, using the examples of Friedrich Bollock and Max Horkheimer. His goal was to be able to explain the inner connection between categorical analysis and the political experiences of the Frankfurt School. So Postone was concerned not only to derive the pessimism of critical theory from the intellectuals' personal emigration histories and experiences with National Socialism and Auschwitz, but to explicate reasons in the theory itself, in order to relate it to the biographical experiences. And according to Postone, the pessimistic turn was based on the thesis of the primacy of the political that was developed by Pollock in the 1930s, and which was adopted by other theorists from the circle of the Institute for Social Research as well. The basis of Pollock's thesis was his observation that the free markets of capitalist societies had been increasingly replaced by state capitalism during this period. The market as an economic mediator was thus visibly replaced by the state as a political mediator. Pollock therefore expands the analysis of capitalist systems, but, as Postone argues, ultimately cannot justify this expansion because he lacks a category that could be used to bring both state capitalist and liberal capitalist systems under one denominator. Pollock concludes, since the economic contradiction of value production has ceased in state capitalism, not only liberal capitalist societies remain contradictory. As a result, and according to Postone, this conception was also adopted by Horkheimer and in parts by Adorno and others, society was not understood as a whole totality. Society was now understood as a whole totality, free of contradiction that exhibited no historical dynamics. In this respect, this one-dimensional totality could no longer be criticized immanently, that is, on the basis of its contradictions. The consequence, according to Postone, is a pessimistic theory that can only understand totality as an insurmountable whole. According to Postone, the fact that critical theory drew these theoretical conclusions was no accident. It is based on assumptions of traditional Marxism, which Postone wanted to overcome in his work with a reinterpretation of Marx. Against the background of Marx's Grundrisse, the preparatory work for Capital Volume 1, the Marxian critique is to be understood as a critique of labor and not as a critique from the standpoint of labor. For Marx, the contradictory dynamics of capitalist society arise from the historically unique dual character of labor, its temporal dialectic between the concrete and abstract dimension. Thus, the development dynamics of capitalist society is not rooted in class antagonism, as often claimed in traditional Marxist theories, but in the double-line character of labor. In accordance to that, for Postone, the dialectic between material wealth and value, as the socially average labor time, is at the heart of capitalist society. The need for every individual to work in order to survive and sustain basic needs leads, according to Postone, to the dependence of capitalist society to obtain the demand for work. Labor, in this sense, is its own mediation, its only purpose to create more labor and to exchange goods mediated by value, indifferent of the content of the commodities. In the face of rationalization and automatization, production gets more and more independent from human labor. At the same time, the need to mediate oneself within the framework of labor doesn't change. This leads to a new contradiction, which is fundamentally different from the traditional Marxist framework as noted already. The overall abolition of human labor is contradicted by the unchanged need for labor as a social mediation, a process which Postone calls the treadmill effect. While capitalist wealth is measured by abstract labor, therefore being abstract wealth, the capitalist process leads to an ever more increasing output of material wealth. This material wealth, unable to be grasped with value, has the potential to be a central form of wealth in an emancipated society. But as long as the labor is understood, a transhistorical principle, only its mode of distribution or its form of ownership can be criticized in a theory. Critical theory, though, too, has remained attached to such a historical concept of labor, as Postone states in his book. Interestingly, Postone partly excludes Marcuse in his critique of the Frankfurt School, and this although Postone seems to implicitly address Marcuse with the concept of one-dimensional totality. Postone thus assumes that Marcuse, despite his thesis of a one-dimensional society, still held to a contradictory constitution of society. In the unpublished text mentioned earlier, Postone writes about Marcuse's Triebstruktur and Errors in Civilization. I quote, "In his writing, as in later essays, Marcuse relativized Freud's cultural pessimism, which was based on the assumption that alienated labor constituted an eternal necessity, by confronting it with the objective historical possibility of overcoming this form of labor, a historical versus a super-historical way of thinking." Postone's claim can be undermined with a quote of Marcuse in one of the already mentioned discussion protocols. In a discussion from 1977, which Postone attended, Marcuse said, quote, "In the so-called consumer society, there are constantly produced goods and services that pretend a life for which work is no longer the main content, while in reality, more and more alienated labor must be expanded to buy these goods and services. This contradiction, apparently the present form of the basic contradiction between social wealth and its miserable use, this contradiction appears in the, let us say calmly, in the realization or in the subconscious realization that a life without work, alienated work, is a real possibility." End of quote. The historical specific dialectic between labor as the source of value and a possible society without the need for value, and thus labor can be seen as a core of Postone and Marcuse's critique of capitalism. Nick, how am I with the time? Okay, so I will skip a part where I talk about the topic in Errors in Civilization and make the transition to next part. I just want to finish with the note that Marcuse and Postone, as we try to show, stand in a line of thought of critical theory, at which center is the critique of labor. Like Postone, Marcuse, at least in some of his writings, understood the dual character of labor is central to the dynamics of capitalist society. But however, their conception of the relationship between abstract and concrete differs in crucial ways. This, we think, explains contradiction in Marcuse's arguments and his reference to Marx's theory of value. And now Nick will continue the input.
Thank you. And I will now continue with more on the differences between those two thinkers. As already mentioned, in a traditional Marxist framework, capitalism's two core elements are market exchange and private property, a notion that situates capitalism in the realm of exchange rather than production. Postone criticized, as did Marcuse, the absent critique of the realm of production in a traditional Marxist framework. As Postone stated, the Marxist affirmation of labor leads and has indeed historically led to the affirmation of the industrial production. Thus, the traditional Marxist approach was in this sense affirming proletarian labor and modernity, or as Marcuse puts it, quote, "the violence of progress." This might be the reason why the proletariat was integrated so smoothly into the modernist project, as Marcuse described it in the One-Dimensional Man. Marcuse's and Postone's approach is thus to escape this progressivist affirmation of industrialization and destruction of nature. Therefore, one must critique the realm of production, what Postone would call proletarian labor. A critique of capitalism must go beyond the mere abolition of exploitation. It requires a critique for a, quote, "change in the technological structure itself," end of quote, as Marcuse put it in One-Dimensional Man. For Marcuse, exactly this technological structure constitutes alienation in the industrialized society. But Marcuse warns, it is not technology as such that is alienating. It has the potential to free mankind from the burden of labor. As such, it would be emancipating. But when the problem lies not in technology as such, it must be found in society. And here, I think, Marcuse comes to a dead end. What is the foundation of technological rationality, if not technology itself? The traditional Marxist framework would argue that market exchange and private property are at the core the classical conflict between capital and labor. And an interpretation that Marcuse and Postone take into question. In One-Dimensional Man, Marcuse notes that technological rationality cannot be overcome by simply exchanging the ruling class, be it proletarian or bourgeois. And now I have a long quote here because I'm a little confused here. I'm not sure what Marcuse means with this. Maybe you can help me later. In the Soviets, I'm quoting now, in the Soviet system, the organization of the productive process certainly separates the immediate producers, the laborers, from control over the means of production, and thus makes for class distinction at the very base of the system. This separation was established by political decision and power after the brief heroic period of the Bolshevik Revolution, and has been perpetuated ever since. And yet, it is not the motor of the productive process itself. It is not built into this process, as is the division between capital and labor derived from private ownership of the means of production. Consequently, the ruling strata are themselves separable from the productive process. That is, they are replaceable without exploding the basic institutions of society. And I'm not sure what he means with basic institutions of society. Is it now the division between capital and labor, or is it something different from that? Yeah, maybe we can discuss it later. The basic institutions of society are therefore independent from the people who rule. That's now my interpretation. What are the basic institutions of society? I can only suggest an interpretation. The basic institutions are the institutions of technological rationality. Therefore, capitalism can be abolished not by just overthrowing a ruling class, but by changing the production process or rationality itself. And this raises a question, again, if the problem is not solved by just exchanging the ruling class, then what distinguishes good technology from bad technology? Emancipatory from alienating technology? The same question as before. And again, Marcuse, as Postone would state, cannot answer that question. In a sense, Marcuse arrives at a similar problem as did Friedrich Pollock and Max Horkheimer before him. While having problems defining capitalism, he shifts the problem to technological rationality, something independent from market and private property. This problem is then to define what constitutes this rationality, if not technology itself. And now the solution might be found in a more precise conception of capitalism that overcomes the old framework of market and private property. As Finn pointed out already, Postone saw the solution in the theory of the social mediation through labor. Okay. In his earlier book, Reason and Revolution, Marcuse engaged vividly with the value theory of labor of Marx, and Russell Rockwell points out in his book Hegel, Marx, and the Necessity and Freedom Dialectic from 2018 that Marcuse's analysis of the value theory of labor was an early understanding of Marx's value theory, and it showed that the early Marcuse knew the importance of the twofold character of the commodity. The problem is now that Rockwell shows that Marcuse rejects, in his later book in One-Dimensional Man, he rejects the value theory because he misreads apart the fragments of machines in the Grundrisse, and it's the same mistake that also Habermas does 1 year before One-Dimensional Man. Yeah.